Here are your hosts, Kyle Fellows and Andrew Mertig. This is the Draft Fellows Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the episode 9 of the Draft Fellows Podcast. I'm Andrew Mertig. That is Kyle Fellows. We are the Draft Fellows. Make sure to follow our channel on YouTube or check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Today, we are back with another draft review, and this time we are starting our coverage of the AFC South. If you want to check out the first 8 episodes of the series, check out the aforementioned channel or audio podcast. But Kyle, how are you doing today?
I am doing really, really well. No one cares, but I'm in the middle of a big bathroom renovation. And so I spent my whole day covered in like grout and doing tiling. And so this is a really fun change of pace. I'm excited to do what I love and talk about the NFL and jump into some of these draft classes with you again. It's going to be a good time. How are you?
I care.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I honestly like a lot of house projects as well. So really interesting that we have that in common. But I am so excited to just not talk about like work or house projects. And, you know, hopefully the folks that tune in feel the same way about this as well. And I mentioned we're going to talk about the AFC South. So we're going to kick things off with the Houston Texans, who, of course, did not have a first-round pick because they made that pre-draft trade with Minnesota Vikings. So they did have 2 second-rounders. They grabbed cornerback Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia and offensive tackle Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame. That says Norty Dame. That's a copy-paste thing. Sorry about that. In the 3rd round, we have safety Kalen Bullock out of USC. In the 4th, tight end Cade Stover from Ohio State. 2 6th-round picks, linebacker Jamal Hill from Oregon and running back Jawar Jordan from Louisville. And then 3 7th-rounders, edge Solomon Byrd, defensive lineman Marcus Harris, and guard Ladarius Henderson. So why don't we kick this off with your thoughts on cornerback Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia?
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited about this conversation because just before we push go on this podcast, you and I kind of acknowledged that we see a few players in this Houston Texans draft class actually quite a bit differently, and Kamari Lassiter is one of those guys. Obviously, you know, the Texans have done some really nice things in the last couple of years. CJ Stroud comes to mind, right? And some of that maneuvering has left them without some high picks, right? So here in the 2nd round, this is their top of the list here and the exciting pick, I guess you would say. But I actually really like Lassiter. He was my cornerback 5 in this class. I know a lot of people were not that high on him, but one thing I really liked about him, he was a physical player. He was willing to be a tackler. There's a deficiency of those guys in this draft class. I think there were a lot of guys who had a lot of other traits. There were not a lot of really good tacklers. So I think that made him higher on my board than some of the other guys, as well as he had some inside-outside versatility, I felt like. And I felt like that was really lacking in this draft class as well. So intentionally or not, I think those things vaulted him up my board. I mentioned that inside-outside versatility. He actually crushed the agility drills at the combine. And I think that also is something that if you can get me a corner that has those loose hips, I get excited about like where you can be in coverage. You can play inside and you're not maybe as dependent on being outside and being more of a linear player. So for me, that versatility kind of put him up the board. And I think it was a 6'6" 3-cone officially. So those are the numbers you fall in love with if you're a sucker like me. So tell me why Kamari Lassiter should not have been my cornerback 5, Andrew.
So interesting, because there's a lot of things in my review that really reflect some of the things that you have said. I had Lassiter as quarterback with a lot of versatility. He plays with great instincts, but I didn't like his athletic traits. I just didn't see like high-end athletic traits on tape. I thought he was a willing and skilled tackler and like seems to maybe have good ball skills, but there was just no turnover production on tape.
That's true.
I thought like despite the play strength, a little bit trouble with jams, at least the technique involved there. And then I thought he got a little grabby when he got beat. And so for me, Lassiter was not necessarily a great film grade. even with the agility scores, his relative athletic score was not super high. And so that pushed him all the way down to, let me verify this, 137 on my board. So to say I wasn't like a huge fan of taking him in the second round, I think is a bit of an understatement. But
yeah, I probably would not have taken him at 42. But second round easily, like later in the second round, would have been totally fine with. But you mentioned the lack of production. I wasn't gonna mention that in my moment there because I didn't want to not make my argument, right? But that was one of the negatives that I wrote down was lots of PBUs, right? So he can make plays, but didn't come away with the ball production and the interception. So that doesn't usually get a ton better in the NFL, but it doesn't, you can still be an impact player without that, but it's just not the cherry on top that a lot of teams are probably looking for when scouting a player. But what about Blake Fisher, Andrew? Do you have any thoughts on their second round pick here, the offensive tackle out of Norte name?
Thanks for bringing that back up. So I don't know how many Texans fans we have right now, but they might tune out after they hear this. I have Blake Fisher at 109 overall. Just okay, there's some things to really like here. He's very young, right? He wasn't even 21 when he was drafted. He'll play his whole rookie year at 21 years old. He comes from a really strong program. I think that there's some athletic skills to go along with the size and strength profile that's really good. I just thought he was kind of incomplete on tape. And so it seems, based on the strengths of what Houston's roster is right now, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that he's going to get the opportunity to be a backup tackle to start his career. And so I think that gives you a little bit more hope. But to me, Fisher was much more of a third or fourth round pick than a second rounder.
I'm trying to verify because I don't want to say anything crazy. He was my offensive tackle 14. So we're not like crazy apart on this. Again, no offense, Texans fans. Didn't love the value here. The upside is the age, basically. Like Andrew laid it out, like this guy was 21, almost on the dot when he was drafted. So this is a guy who has a lot of development in front of him, and it's footwork issues, and it's being overpowered by strong pass rushers. So if he can add a little bit of strength, you think that at his age, like that is in the cards, then maybe some of those things get worked out. But with that developmental kind of profile, you would think that maybe he would have gone a little bit later than the late second round here. But a player you like a little better was their next selection, I think, and that's Kalen Bullock, the safety out of USC. So
I'm about to win our Texans fans back.
There we go. Come back.
Kalen Bullock, he ended up being my safety 1 in this class.
What? Oh, I told you what he was for me, and I did not know he was your safety 1.
Yeah, okay. So I had him at 47th overall. He had a really strong film grade, not the top film grade that I gave out in the safeties, but he was up there. And then he was under 21 when drafted. Pretty solid at athletic testing. I loved his versatility. I think he can be a true slot player if you want to play him there, but I also think he has center field capabilities at safety. So that is the one pick in this class that I absolutely loved, and I have a feeling you're going to disagree with me.
Yeah, I told you, like, this was my safety 10, so different feel here. I do feel like pick 78 like isn't insane. So value here, I'm not upset about what they did here. And I understand it, right? Like I wanted to like Bullock actually quite a bit. He's just so frail. And I know like that's one thing about his profile, but it's just hard to get past that he would kind of be a small and slender player if he was a corner. And so as a safety, for me, it's just hard. It makes me nervous, right? At 6'3", 190, he's just a stretched out player, and you don't see a lot of guys with that profile. And I'm sure there are people that you could throw out at me that would confirm that you can be that size and be effective as a safety. But the lanky safety type isn't my favorite. There is a lot of upside here though, and he's 21 years old again. But for me, it's just that profile. You don't see a lot of it in the NFL, and it'll be interesting to see if he can become a more physical player because it's not his want to, it's just his body that doesn't really do what he needs it to do.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. I think there's a little bit of floor there because I think you can throw him at like a true slot corner and just let him play there if
That's
safety
true.
doesn't
Yep.
pan out based on size. But again, he's going to have to tackle out of the slot. So either way, I think that frame, to your point, can be a little limiting. The rest of the draft class, I don't have a lot to say. I do think Cade Stover, the tight end from Ohio State, is kind of interesting. He's a converted defensive player. He kind of plays like it. Like I wasn't super high on him, but as a like really, really aggressive blocking tight end who has excellent hands, by the way.
Yeah.
I think, that makes sense in this San Francisco-esque offense to have a real nasty second tight end as a blocker.
Yeah, I actually thought that Nick Casario's comments were really interesting following this pick, that like this was a CJ Stroud motivated pick. Obviously, there's that connection there, with Ohio State. And he did play with an injury. Stover did in 2023. So that was noted by Casario, the GM. And they think that this is a guy whose best football is ahead of him and has that just like the work ethic and the want to become a better NFL player than he was college player. Probably all signed off on by CJ Stroud. And you kind of wonder, like, what was this they're scouting and what was CJ's influence? But obviously could be a really fun piece there for Stroud in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And so interesting Texans class, right? And they punted a little bit on this year by moving all the way down into the mid-second round and picking up that extra second rounder from Minnesota, which they then flipped for Stephon Diggs. So that is kind of part of this draft class as well.
True.
Definitely something to consider as you look at their overall draft haul. And now we are transitioning over to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they, in the first round, took wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. In the second round, they return to LSU and go with defensive lineman Mason Smith. In the third, quarterback Jerrion Jones out of Florida State. In the fourth, 2 picks there, Javon Foster, the tackle from Missouri. Jordan Jefferson, the defensive lineman from, you guessed it, LSU. And then we have the 5th round, 2 picks there, DeAndre Prince, the cornerback, and running back Keelan Robinson out of Texas. 6th round, kicker Cam Little from Arkansas. And then the 7th round, defensive end Miles Cole from Texas Tech. So probably should kick things off with Brian Robinson, I suppose.
We could, but it'd be better if we talked about Brian Thomas Jr.
Thomas is what I meant to say.
That's a player they took. Brian Thomas Jr., one of my favorite players in this class, actually. And I think we may actually have some good discourse here because I don't know that is how you viewed him, but I love this player. And it's interesting because I don't typically love players that kind of profile as your 9 route deep threats. Like that's kind of a limited profile typically. But I think that there's a lot more to Brian Thomas than what he showed at LSU. And what he showed at LSU was pretty dang good. So there's a lot to like here. For me, this is a guy with true speed, of course, right? 4.3 legit speed. But I think is a lot looser and agile than a lot of players that you see at his height and that kind of serve the role that he does on an offense. So I think that there is developmental upside here for what he can be as a player who catches the ball in the intermediate routes and across the middle of the field. And he showed flashes of like a little bit of wiggle, like after the catch that like, not a lot, but like in opportunities, there was some of that there. And I think that there's some untapped potential to be excited about if you're a Jaguars fan rather. For me, I think his ceiling is kind of T. Higgins. If he becomes like a true 1 for an offense, I think that's kind of like his path there to being that. And for me, the thing that really set him apart that probably had him firmly my wide receiver 4 behind the big 3 in this class was his natural hands and just ability to locate the ball. I just felt like it felt so effortless and natural for him to go up and get the ball at the catch point. And I think that that's a trait that usually translates pretty well to the NFL combined with that speed. So loved Brian Thomas Jr. And I think that Trevor Lawrence got a pretty sweet weapon here.
Yeah, I didn't dislike Brian Thomas in any way. I had him as my wide receiver 8, which sounds bad, but overall player 29. So
yeah, okay.
you know what I thought of this wide receiver class.
Good context,
even after people cooled on it a little bit. He's super explosive. You talked about it. He's big, strong. He's good at going up and getting the ball. The only thing that I was really concerned about was just a little bit of the stiffness in the hips. And like, can this guy ever be somebody who runs in breakers? Now, early in his career, it absolutely doesn't matter because the Jaguars' offensive plan is so obvious, right? Like they're going to run Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. deep, and they're going to run off the coverage, and then they're like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram and Travis Etienne. Like they're just going to let them eat everything underneath, right? So I don't think Thomas is necessarily going to have huge numbers, but I think potentially he could have some really big impact on the game. And then as teams start to sneak up, then you can go Thomas over the top. And I think he can be really impactful here. So yeah, I like the pick. I think, it's okay value at 23. I think for their scheme fit, this might be a player that makes more sense than like me evaluating kind of overall. So yeah, I like what the Jaguars did here. What are your thoughts on Mason Smith? Because I have a feeling this is kind of a controversial player.
Yeah, this one's tough for me. Like, powerful player, really long player. I can't remember this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that this is a player who came in as like a 4-star, if not a 5-star recruit into the program. And so had these lofty expectations kind of out of the gate. He had the torn ACL in the 2022 season that he got during a celebration. So that, got some news coverage and some poor publicity for that because of the timing of it. But never really became the player that a lot of people thought he was going to. So, but really good hands. I thought his hand placement and hand usage was really, really good. Active. Bendy is kind of a word that I put in his profile for a defensive tackle. Isn't a word that you use a lot for someone who rushes from like the interior. And really explosive off the snap. So really interesting. I don't know like what he becomes in the NFL. The flashes are really big and good. I just don't know that we've seen the consistency, and that's why a player like him goes in the second round at 48, because if he reaches his ceiling, it could be pretty impactful. But where did you have Mason Smith?
Yeah, he ended up being player 60 for me, which is actually higher than I recall. So looking at his film grade, it was not particularly impressive. So that might have been what is sticking out in my mind. But yeah, the tools are unreal. This is a really big guy, and LSU played him on the edge at times. Like he's so athletic.
Right.
My huge issues are, one, he plays really high, and like that can be a lot of things. It can be technique, it can be laziness, it can be you're tired and out of shape. Like there's so many different things that can contribute to that. So what it is, Jags are just taking a bet that like, hey, this guy has the kind of tools that if he was a complete package, he'd probably be a top 15 pick. But huge risk, huge reward. I really like that. I think his counter moves are not great at this point, and for a player to truly become elite, they're going to need to develop a pass rush, especially because I didn't think he was particularly good at taking on double teams. And again, that's probably a leverage thing. So if he can play a little bit lower, he can be a big impact on the run game. That raises his floor quite a bit. If he can work on those hand counters, he becomes a pass rush impact player. And with Trevon Walker coming off of the edge, and really like that defensive line as a whole, Josh Allen, etc., like he could make a really, really big impact in Jacksonville.
So the rest of this class, Andrew, I don't know if anybody stands out to you. Again, to be a Debbie Downer for Jacksonville Jaguars fans, I felt like Jarrian Jones was a significant reach in the third round. I watched 20 corners in this class. I think I have 22 graded. And I watched just enough of Jarrian Jones to be like, he's not going to threaten my top 20. I don't need to spend a lot of time here. So, but that, that means that maybe I didn't dig in far enough, and maybe that there's a diamond in the rough like here with Jarrian Jones. But felt like he was early. I don't know if you have any thoughts there. And then Javon Foster is fascinating to me in the fourth round. Like, this is a team anybody could benefit from more offensive line help, and the Jaguars certainly singled him out as a player they think that could help them.
Yeah, I had Jerrion Jones at 140 overall. I had Javon Foster at 187. So, like, not loving the value there. Doesn't mean they're not going to be really good players. But for Jones, weirdly, I didn't really like either of the Florida State corners, Renardo Green or Jerrion Jones.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought I would like them a little bit more. I thought for Jones, primarily a slot player. He's got good quickness, good instincts, but he struggled in run defense and his footwork could be a little sloppy. And those things, when you're maybe like, this is just me evaluating, but like when you're a slot only, your footwork needs to be on par, right? You can't just rely on quickness in the NFL because you will get eaten up by the elite route runners coming out of the slot.
Exactly.
And you have to be a good tackler. And so for those to be the two red flags was concerning for me. So we'll see. Maybe the Jaguars view him a little bit more as an outside player, and that mitigates some of those concerns as well. I didn't have a lot on the rest of this class. I think Keelan Robinson is intriguing. I did not watch him, but I've heard some good things. And Texas, like, what is going on in their running back room? That backups keep getting drafted, like guys that get no carries at all are getting drafted, like just freak athletes. And maybe an opportunity to get a little bit of some touches. We don't know what the Tank Bigsby situation is.
It's true.
Can he ever hold on to the ball? And so maybe Robinson makes a little bit of an impact there. And I've said before, I don't scout kickers. Don't know anything about Cam Little, but I have a feeling you draft a kicker in the 6th round, they got a pretty good chance to make the team.
Yeah, absolutely. He's gonna kick it through the uprights. If it goes through, he's a good kicker. If it doesn't, then he's not a good kicker. This is how we scout kickers. So yeah, no, Javon Foster's the only other one that, like, this is a player. I think in 2 or 3 years we'll have a pretty good feel for where his career is going to go. Yeah. Kind of an overachiever for his athletic profile. 24 years old. So, like, that's interesting that he is a older player with some athletic deficiencies, but he's a team captain, 2-time team captain at Missouri. So this is a locker room kind of a guy that they've brought in. So someone who may, commit to doing things the right way and carve out a role in this offensive line in some way. But overall, Jacksonville is a super interesting draft class. Some help on the offensive side of the ball with Brian Thomas Jr. to maybe get things going in the right direction there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think two really interesting classes for two teams that we think are going to be really competitive for quite a while. Two young rosters, a lot of players already that these rookies are going to try to accentuate and really build on some success that each of these teams is expecting in the upcoming season.
Yep, absolutely. So that's the show. Thanks for tuning in to hear Texans, Jaguars draft talk. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show, and we will be covering each division in football over the next couple of weeks. So stick with us. From the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.